My parents didn't ask me. They looked across the dining room table, straight at my husband. Then my father smiled. She'll cover the debt. Like I wasn't sitting there, like my bank account belonged to everyone except me. My younger brother Ethan leaned back in his chair and actually laughed. I knew Ava wouldn't let family lose the house. My mother nodded proudly. She never refuses family. My husband Daniel didn't argue. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look surprised. He simply folded his napkin, looked around the table, and quietly asked, "Whose signature is on the loan?" The room went silent. My father answered too quickly, "That's not important." Daniel nodded once. "It will be." I didn't understand why those two words made my mother suddenly stop smiling. I wouldn't understand until 6 weeks later, when a detective knocked on my parents' front door. And my brother realized the debt he'd spent 2 years blaming on bad luck was never supposed to belong to me. Welcome back. If you've ever been expected to sacrifice everything simply because you were the responsible one, then this story is for you. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been treated like the family ATM? And if stories about justice, betrayal, and standing up for yourself inspire you, don't forget to subscribe. Now, let me tell you how my own family nearly destroyed my marriage. Because they believed I'd never say no. My name is Ava Carter. I'm 34 years old. I've been married to Daniel for 7 years. People who meet us now think we've always had a peaceful life. They couldn't be more wrong. Growing up, I wasn't the favorite child. I was the dependable one. There's a difference. Favorites get affection. Dependable children get responsibilities. By the time I was 12, I packed my own lunches. At 14, I was cooking dinner 3 nights a week. At 16, I worked weekends. Because my parents said learning responsibility was good for my character. Meanwhile, my younger brother Ethan spent most afternoons playing video games. If he forgot homework, Mom called the teacher. If he wrecked the car, Dad bought another one. If I got straight A's, my parents said, "That's what we expect from you." If Ethan barely passed, they celebrated with dinner out. I spent years trying not to notice, because every time I mentioned it, my mother would smile sadly. "Oh, sweetheart, your brother just needs us more." Those 6 words shaped my entire childhood. Your brother just needs us more. Apparently, he always did. When I graduated college with honors, my parents skipped the ceremony because Ethan had a regional baseball game. When I bought my first condo at 28, Dad asked if Ethan could borrow my spare bedroom, just until he got back on his feet. He stayed 14 months. He never paid rent. When he finally left, my refrigerator was empty, my television was gone, and somehow, Mom convinced me not to ask for repayment. Family doesn't keep score. Funny, that rule only seemed to apply when I was the one losing something. Daniel noticed the pattern long before I did. We'd only been dating 3 months when my mother called during dinner. "Ava, Ethan's credit card got declined. He needs $400. I apologized to Daniel, transferred the money, and returned to the table. Daniel never complained. He simply asked, "Does he pay you back?" I laughed. "No, does he ever?" "No, will he this time?" I shrugged. "I doubt it." Daniel smiled politely, then changed the subject. Looking back, he wasn't ignoring the problem. He was studying it. After we got married, things became worse. Not immediately. Slowly, quietly, like water dripping into a bucket. Every few weeks there was another emergency. Ethan lost another job. His rent was overdue. His truck needed repairs. His girlfriend left. He forgot insurance. He couldn't afford groceries. There was always something, always a reason, always a crisis, and every crisis somehow ended with my mother calling me, "Ava." I hate asking, but Ethan, those words became so predictable that sometimes I'd finish her sentence before she did. Daniel watched. He never interfered. He always asked one question afterward. "Did anyone thank you?" Usually, the answer was no. Sometimes, they complained I hadn't sent enough. 5 years into our marriage, Daniel and I had finally reached a place we'd dreamed about. No credit card debt, healthy savings, a down payment ready for our forever home. We weren't wealthy. We were disciplined. Every vacation we skipped, every unnecessary purchase we avoided, every overtime shift I accepted, every weekend Daniel spent doing freelance engineering work. Built that savings account. It wasn't just money. It was years of saying no to ourselves for a future together. Only 3 people knew about it: Daniel, me, and unfortunately, my mother. I made the mistake of mentioning we were house hunting. She became strangely interested, asking how much we'd saved, whether we'd found a neighborhood, Whether we'd been pre-approved at the time. It felt like harmless curiosity. Now, I know she was calculating. 2 weeks later, she invited everyone over for Sunday dinner. She sounded unusually cheerful. "You'll all love the surprise." I should have known. Every disaster in my family began with the words, "It'll just be a nice family dinner." When Daniel and I arrived, Ethan was already there. He looked nervous, sweating, avoiding eye contact. His wife Mia barely spoke. Dad opened a bottle of wine. Mom cooked my favorite roast. Everyone acted too nice. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like everyone knew something you didn't? That's exactly how it felt. Dinner was awkward, conversations started, then died. Every time Ethan reached for his drink, his hands shook. Daniel noticed. Of course he noticed. He notices everything. Still, he said almost nothing. Dessert arrived. Mom cleared her throat. Dad folded his hands. Then my father smiled at Daniel. "The family needs to work together." Daniel nodded politely. "What happened?" Dad looked toward Ethan. "Our boy made a mistake." Mom immediately interrupted. "Anyone could have." Daniel waited. Silence has always been his greatest weapon. Eventually, Ethan spoke. "I invested in a business." "What business?" "It's complicated." "How much?" No answer. Dad answered instead. 280,000. I nearly dropped my fork. "What?" Mom reached across the table and touched my hand. "Sweetheart, don't panic. We already have a solution." That sentence should have terrified me. Instead, I asked the worst possible question. "What solution?" My father smiled. "The bank will be paid." I looked around the room. "How?" Then, without asking me, without even looking at me, he turned toward Daniel and said the words that changed everything. "She'll cover the debt." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. I laughed. Nobody else did. Mom squeezed my hand. "Honey, you've always been generous." Dad nodded. "And Ethan needs us." Needs us. Not needs you. Needs us. Which somehow translated into my savings, my future, my house. Daniel still hadn't spoken. He simply watched everyone, like he was putting together pieces of a puzzle nobody else realized existed. Mom smiled warmly. "You'll still have plenty left." I stared. "Mom, that money is for our house." She sighed dramatically. "Houses can wait, family can't." Dad added, "You've always landed on your feet." Ethan finally looked at me. "I'll pay you back." The room went so quiet I could hear the clock in the hallway. Because everyone knew. That was a lie. Even Ethan knew it. I turned toward Daniel, waiting, hoping, needing him to rescue me. Instead, he calmly reached for his glass of water, took one sip, set it back down, then looked directly at my father, and asked, "Whose signature is on the loan?" Dad frowned. "What difference does that make?" Daniel smiled politely. "The difference between responsibility and liability." My mother's smile disappeared, only for a second, but I saw it. So did Daniel. He asked again, "Whose signature?" Ethan looked at Dad. Dad looked at Mom. Nobody answered. Daniel nodded slowly. "I thought so." He stood, took my hand, and quietly said, "Ava, we're leaving." I followed him out of the house, completely confused. Halfway to the car, I finally asked, "What just happened?" Daniel opened my door, waited until we were both inside, then looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Calm, concerned, certain. "Ava, I need you to answer one question." "What?" "Have you ever signed anything for your brother?" I searched my memory. Loans, papers, documents, nothing came to mind. "I don't think so." He didn't look relieved. He looked even more worried, because whatever he had noticed at that dinner, he wasn't ready to tell me yet, and before the week was over, someone else would call. Not my mother. Not my father. Not Ethan. The bank. The bank called the next morning. Not my bank. Ethan's. The woman on the phone sounded polite, professional. "Mrs. Carter?" "Yes. We'd like to verify some information regarding a loan application." I frowned. "What loan application?" There was a pause. "The one listing you as a guarantor." My stomach dropped. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" "You were listed as a guarantor on Mr. Ethan Brooks' commercial loan." "I never agreed to that." The woman became cautious. "Would you be willing to come into the branch today? I think you'll want to see the documents." Daniel drove. Neither of us spoke much. He kept one hand on the steering wheel. The other rested lightly over mine. For the first time, I felt afraid. Not because of money, because of what my husband already suspected. The loan officer introduced herself as Karen. She led us into a private office, closed the door, placed a folder on the table. I need to ask one question before we continue. She looked directly at me. Did you personally sign these documents? She slid them across the table. There, on the final page, was my signature, my name, my handwriting, my initials. Everything looked real, except I'd never seen those papers before. I didn't sign this. Karen didn't answer immediately. Instead, she handed me another page. Compare them. One was my driver's license signature, the other, the loan agreement. At first glance, they looked identical. Daniel leaned closer, then quietly asked, "May I?" Karen nodded. He studied both signatures for nearly a minute, then looked at me. "You didn't write this." Karen blinked. "How can you tell?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Because Ava never loops the second A in her last name." I looked again. He was right. The signature looked perfect, except for one tiny detail. One tiny detail I'd never noticed about myself. Someone else had, but not well enough. Karen slowly closed the folder. "I was afraid you'd say that." She opened another file. "This loan has missed 6 consecutive payments. Balance outstanding." She checked the screen. $273,000. My breathing became shallow. If my signature is fake, why am I listed? Karen hesitated. "Because whoever submitted the paperwork included copies of your identification and several financial documents." Daniel's expression hardened. "What financial documents?" "Our records indicate tax returns, salary verification, and proof of savings." I stared at her. "Our savings?" She nodded. "Yes." My heart stopped. Those documents had never left our home. On the drive back, I couldn't stop thinking. Who had access? Who knew where we kept them? Who even knew we had them? Then it hit me. 3 months earlier, my mother had asked to borrow our home office printer. She'd stayed nearly an hour, alone. I'd been making coffee. Daniel had been outside fixing the fence. She was inside. By herself. That evening, I opened our filing cabinet. Nothing appeared missing. Passports, insurance, tax returns, everything was there. Daniel quietly looked behind the folders, then underneath them. Finally, he found it. The envelope that once held our copies. It had been opened, very carefully, almost professionally. "You didn't notice?" I whispered. He shook his head. "No, because whoever did this wanted us not to." Mom called 3 times that night. I ignored every call. Then came the text. "Family is more important than paperwork." Daniel read it, smiled without humor. "Interesting." "What?" "She thinks this is about paperwork." "It isn't. It's about fraud." The next morning, Daniel took the day off work. I made an appointment. "With who?" "A lawyer." I blinked. "You already called one?" He nodded. "Yesterday." Yesterday, while I was crying in the bedroom, he had already started preparing. The attorney's office overlooked the city. Simple, quiet, no expensive decorations, just shelves full of legal books. His name was Michael Reeves. He listened without interrupting. When we finished, he asked one question. "Who had access to your financial records?" "My parents. My brother. My mother especially." He nodded. "Did anyone ever ask for copies?" "No." "Were they ever alone inside your home?" Daniel answered. "Yes." Michael leaned back, then asked something unexpected. "Did your parents ever pressure you to co-sign anything before?" I laughed bitterly. "They've asked dozens of times, and I always refused." He looked directly at me. "Then someone decided to remove your ability to refuse." The room became completely silent. Michael requested copies of everything: the forged signature, bank records, phone logs, family messages. He wasn't interested in emotions, only evidence. Daniel had already organized nearly everything: printed screenshots, bank statements, text messages, call history, even photographs of the open document envelope. Michael looked impressed. "You've done half my job." Daniel shrugged. "I had a feeling." I turned toward him. "You knew?" He sighed. "I didn't know. I suspected. When your father answered for Ethan, when your mother refused to say whose signature was on the loan, I realized they weren't asking for help. They were hiding something." That afternoon, Michael filed requests for additional banking records. Then he gave us one instruction: "Do not confront your family." I frowned. "Why?" "Because guilty people talk, innocent people cooperate. Right now, we need them talking." We didn't have to wait long. That evening, Dad showed up at our house, alone. He looked exhausted. Older. As though he'd aged years and days. "Ava, can we talk?" Daniel invited him inside. Dad sat quietly for several minutes. Finally, he spoke. Your mother doesn't know I'm here. That immediately caught Daniel's attention. Dad looked at me. I need you to understand. This wasn't supposed to happen. What wasn't? The bank wasn't supposed to call you. I froze. You knew? He covered his face. I knew there were papers. I didn't know. They weren't real. I stared. You expect me to believe that? He looked genuinely ashamed. Your mother said. You'd agreed. And Ethan confirmed it. Daniel finally spoke. You saw Ava sign? Dad hesitated. No, you heard her agree? No, so you assumed. Dad couldn't answer. For nearly 20 years, my father had assumed Ethan needed help, assumed Mom knew best, assumed I would understand, assumed I'd forgive, assumed wrong. Before leaving, Dad quietly said something that stayed with me. It wasn't Ethan's idea. I looked up. What? The loan, the papers, the signatures. Your mother handled everything. Then he walked out, leaving Daniel and me standing in complete silence. 3 days later, Michael called. We received the first batch of bank records. His voice sounded different, more serious. Can you both come in? When we arrived, several documents already covered his conference table: property records, wire transfers, loan agreements, business registrations. I looked at Daniel. He looked back at me. Neither of us spoke. Michael picked up one document. This changes everything. He slid it toward me. Across the top, printed in bold letters, was the name of Ethan's company. Beneath it, the list of owners: owner number 1, Ethan Brooks; owner number 2, Linda Brooks. My mother, not my father, not Ethan's wife, my mother. She hadn't just helped him, she had owned half the business, half the debt, half the responsibility, yet somehow, she'd volunteered my savings, not hers. Michael folded his hands. I believe your mother wasn't trying to save your brother. She was trying to save herself. I felt every piece of the puzzle beginning to move, but one question still remained. If my mother owned half the company, then where had the money gone? Michael looked toward Daniel, then back at me. I think we're about to find out. For almost 30 seconds, nobody spoke. I kept staring at the ownership papers, my mother's name, right beside Ethan's 50%. She hadn't simply helped him, she'd built the business with him, which meant every dollar of that debt belonged to her just as much as it belonged to my brother. So, I whispered, she volunteered my money to save herself. Attorney Michael Reeves nodded. That's exactly what these records suggest. I felt sick, not because of the money, because this had never been about family. It had been about protecting my mother. Michael slid another document across the table. This came from the county recorder's office. Daniel picked it up first. His eyes narrowed. What is it? A lien against your parents' house. My heart skipped. What? Michael continued calmly. 6 months ago, they borrowed against their home to keep Ethan's company alive. They lost that money, then they refinanced. They lost that too, and when the bank refused another extension, they needed someone with excellent credit. He looked directly at me. You? Everything suddenly made sense. The endless questions about our savings. The Sunday dinner, the pressure, the guilt. They never intended to ask, they intended to take. Daniel looked unusually calm, too calm. I knew that look. He had figured out something. What? He turned toward Michael. Ask for the surveillance footage. Michael smiled. I already did. I blinked. What surveillance footage? The bank. The day the loan documents were signed. My stomach tightened. 2 days later, we were sitting inside the bank's security office. The manager loaded a recording. The timestamp appeared. 3 months earlier, a woman walked inside. Dark blue coat, large handbag, hair tied back. My mother. She approached a desk, sat down. A loan officer handed her documents. She smiled, signed something. Then, she opened her purse, removed another folder. The camera couldn't show the paperwork, but it clearly showed something else. She wasn't alone. Ethan sat beside her. Watching. Waiting. No one else ever entered the office. Certainly not me. The manager stopped the video. There was only one customer that afternoon. Michael quietly folded his hands. Thank you.